بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم آمين وبعد. We continue with Safinat al-Najat by Sheikh Salim ibn Abdullah al-Hadrami rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafa'ana Allah bi'ulumihi fi ad-darain ameen. This next part or section, the Imam, he speaks about the nullifiers of wudu, the factors that break the wudu. And he says, rahimahullah, نواقض الوضوء أربعة أشياء. He said the nullifiers or the factors that nullify wudu are four things. There are four things that break the wudu. The first, he says, rahimahullah, anything that exits from either the front or rear private part, whether wind or anything else except semen. So the first nullifier of wudu is anything that exits from the private part. It can be urine, stool, gas, blood, kidney stone, whatever it is. If there is a discharge from the private part, we mentioned the pre-sexual fluid, it's called wadi, and there's it's called wadi, and there's I don't know the term for it, but it's this heavy fluid after urination and fatigue. It's called wadi, and so that also nullifies the wudu. And so anything that exits from the private part requires wudu, except semen. Semen requires ghusl. Semen requires ghusl. And so all these other matters, they require wudu. And that is why when somebody asks, if somebody asks you, what nullifies wudu, you don't say gas. You don't say urine. You say anything, because that's just one part of the hukm. Right? If you say gas, then you didn't identify the hukm. So you say anything that exits from the private part, you make wudu for it immediately. The second, he says loss of intellect through sleep. Or before I continue, I want to make a comment. If najasa, so the hukum is not based on najasa. In some madhahib, they have some differential or differences they make, but here it's not about najasa. So if somebody was to bleed from their mouth or to bleed from their nose, it doesn't break their wudu. If they were to vomit, it doesn't break their wudu. Right? So it isn't about najasa. Some people, they think, oh, najasa breaks your wudu. Najasa doesn't break your wudu. What breaks the wudu is anything that exits from the private part. So if anything comes out from the private part, be it najis or not, because gas is not najis. Right? So you're going to say, well, what are we going to do there? Right? So it's not about najasa. It's the fact that something came out of the private part from the private parts, then it requires wudu. And so if it's najasa that comes out from the other parts, like for example, somebody vomited, or they bled, or they had a bloody nose, anything of that sort, there's no wudu required. It's najis, it has to be washed off. Vomit is najis. Blood is najis. So you have to wash it off. But do you need to make wudu for it? No, you do not. And then, like I said, we have, I mentioned before in the previous nights, we have the fiqh book available, so if anybody wants to purchase, Brother Karana, inshallah, can grab a book for you, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We have sisters in the back. You can also just notify us, and inshallah, you can grab a copy of the book, inshallah, to follow along. The second hukum, he says, loss of intellect through sleep or other causes, except sleep while firmly seated on the ground. So here, loss of intellect means a few different things. In the footnote, he says, meaning the loss of the ability to distinguish. So if a person falls asleep, it's considered loss of intellect. If a person faints, they got dizzy and they fainted and became unconscious, even for a brief moment, that's a loss of intellect. If a person has a mental episode where maybe they just kind of blanked out and they weren't mentally present, that's considered loss of intellect. So all of these things are all together. They're all one hukum. We call it loss of intellect. Sleep, having a mental episode, fainting, becoming becoming unaware. Your mind is unaware and unable to distinguish. That breaks the wudu. That breaks the wudu. Except in one case, he said, except sleep while firmly seated on the ground. So sleep while seated firmly on the ground doesn't break your wudu. And so sometimes you will see that somebody will be listening to the khutbah during Jum'ah, and then you'll see a brother take a doze off, right? Or sometimes during a lecture or something, right? Brother is sitting, or it could be a sister, and then they kind of just sleep in their position, right? If a person sleeps in that position, it doesn't break their wudu. That's the only time sleep or loss of intellect doesn't break your wudu. Is if you sleep while firmly seated on the ground. And a chair could apply, but it has to be in a position that is similar to the ground. And then the hukum, why do they say firmly seated on the ground? They say in a manner that you can't pass gas. Right? So gas cannot pass because there's no airflow, and so therefore it doesn't break your wudu. But if you're leaning on the side, or leaning on something, or sitting on a chair where you're not firmly seated, that breaks your wudu. So that's kind of where that hukum comes from. Any questions about the first two nawaqid? Yeah. A little nap on the side before Fajr, right? Between Tahajjud and Fajr, right? Yeah, so the Prophet ﷺ did take a nap between Tahajjud and Fajr, that is established. But I'm not aware myself of any madhab that says that taking a nap doesn't break your wudu.
That breaks the wudu?
Taking a nap breaks the wudu.
Like, not between Tahajjud, but between the
Dhuhr and Asr?
No,
which one?
Between the two Fajr and
the Fard. Oh, no, the Sunnah, I remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he slept between Tahajjud and the Adhan of Fajr. It wasn't the Sunnah. From what I recall, it's not the Sunnah. He slept after Tahajjud, he took a brief nap until Tahajjud. And so are there scholars that say sleeping doesn't break your wudu? There could be. I mean, I'm pretty sure that some scholars might make an argument, but I myself have no knowledge of that. Everything I've read from the scholars, and especially in Shafi'i law, I've never come across a madhab, an official opinion that says sleeping doesn't break a wudu, but I don't know all the schools. Every school is subhanAllah, they have their own science and methodology. So I can look into that and see. So the brother was asking, for those who are listening online, is there a school, a madhab, that says sleeping doesn't break your wudu? And I said, according to my knowledge, I don't know of that opinion. That little nap, I know it's established, but it's possible that I just right now off the top of my head, a few explanations can be given. First of all, the Prophet ﷺ, his sleep is not like ours, because he said, my eyes sleep, but my heart doesn't. So that's one. And another explanation that can be given is light sleep, for example, so sometimes you start dozing off, but you hear the sound around you, and if you're kind of partially awake, that doesn't break your wudu. So it could be given some of these explanations. There's a hadith that says, al-aynani wika'u sah, that the eyes prevent the release of gas, or they're by the means by which a person controls any release of gas. And so, فَمَنْ نَامَ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأْ, whoever sleeps, let him make wudu. So there's a hadith that commands that. And so that is what the Shafi'i school adopted. Any sleep, yeah. If a person sleeps, that breaks their wudu. But I can look into the other madhab and see, inshallah, if there is a school that says that sleep doesn't break the wudu. The wudu, inshallah.
Did you just say sleep, like you sit in the ground, not make wudu?
Like this form, crisscross, firm position.
How about you just like?
Nope. If you whatever lean over to the sides, you have to make wudu. So it has to be firm on the ground the entire time. Or it has to be very light to the point you're just kind of like dozing off, but you're still awake. And so that doesn't break the wudu. No. Third, skin-to-skin contact between an adult, non-mahram, male and female, without any barrier. And so this mas'ala, I know there's a lot of debate between the madhahib. And every ruling of these issues, there's a lot of debate, and I'm pretty sure regarding sleep, there's a lot of debate. So in the Shafi'i school, they say skin-to-skin contact. So if a man, non-mahram man, touches a non-mahram woman, right, just for even a moment, any skin, a finger touch, anything of that sort, it breaks the wudu. Regardless of your intention, regardless of your desire, regardless of anything. You're at the gas station or you're at the grocery store, you're getting your change back from the cashier, and she's a female, and she touches your hand while giving you your change, that breaks your wudu, according to the Shafi'i law. So they're the most strict in this mas'ala. The other madhahib don't adopt this opinion. And so they have a strong evidence to support that. And so the two other schools, the Maliki and the Hanbali school, they make the distinction of desire. They say if you touch a woman with desire, then in that case it breaks your wudu. If it's not without desire, where it's just accidental, or even if it's intentional for whatever reason, then it doesn't break the wudu unless there is some type of arousal. Somebody's romantically excited by that woman, then at that point, or same for the woman, at that point, then the wudu is broken. And so that is the opinion, and that is an opinion that I personally adopt. And so I think it's fine to adopt and has strong arguments. One of the arguments that is made is that Nabi alayhi salam, once while he was praying tahajjud, he would touch the feet of Sayyidina Aisha while he was praying for her to move. And this is authentic hadith. And so the Shafi'is argue, they say he can touch her without a barrier. So there's still an argument. There's some hadith, there's a hadith that say the Prophet ﷺ used to kiss his wives before going to prayer. But those hadith are not authentic. They're not sahih. So those are some, although it's mentioned, but none of those hadith are authentic and sahih. The one that is authentic is that the Prophet ﷺ would touch her, Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha, while he's praying tahajjud, and she would curl her feet or remove her feet so he can make sujood, alayhi salatu wassalam. And so those the Hanbali and Maliki school, they use the argument that there shows that there's some touching, and so what the touching, because the ayah says, "Oh, la mastumun nisa," or if you touch women. So touching women breaks the wudu by the text of the Quran. It's just what type of touching? What is meant by touching? And so the fuqaha, they went three different ways, primarily like three opinions. The Hanafi, they said la mastum here means sexual intercourse. That breaks your wudu. So they went to the kind of they have the kind of the most lenient opinion in the mas'ala. The Shafi'is, they said any physical contact, skin contact breaks your wudu. And kind of the Hanbali, Maliki madhabs are in between, where they're like, no, it's touching the skin, and it has to be with desire. Now, interestingly here, the wife is non-mahram. People are always surprised when I say this. The wife or the husband is non-mahram. Because non-mahram is somebody you can't marry, or somebody you can marry, sorry. Mahram, what does mahram mean? They're haram for you to marry. So when the scholars, they say when a woman travels, they say she needs a mahram or her spouse or her husband. That's how you define it. Mahram or husband. Because the husband is not a mahram. He doesn't fall under that category. Right? So often people think, oh, no, that's my mahram. Your husband is not your mahram. Or for a man, your wife is not your mahram. Mahram means somebody that is haram for you to marry. So in the Shafi'i school, touching one's spouse does break the wudu. And for those who come from a Shafi'i background, you'll see our elders, they practice that very strictly. They say, touching your spouse, or, when they want to keep their wudu, they're like, don't touch me, because they want to keep their wudu. So they're very, very strict with that and very firm. And that's the other opinion is something a little more lenient, and if a person wants to adopt that, it is a fair opinion and something that has evidence to back it up, and is an official opinion of more than one school. Wallahu a'lam. And then I also said for the people online and for the sisters who want to ask a question, feel free to message me at the Masjid phone number. If you Google OBK Islamic Center, you can send your questions to our WhatsApp number. or our direct just phone number, and inshallah I can receive it on my end and respond to the questions there. And then the fourth nullifier of wudu is touching the private parts of a human being with the palm or inner surface of the fingers. All right, so here is touching the private parts of a human being, be it oneself or be it another person, be it a child even. So washing a child, washing a child from najasa, a baby, or touching one of their own private part on purpose or accident breaks the wudu. And this means the private part. So not the thighs, not around, not pubic hair, the private parts. And so touching the private parts breaks the wudu with the palm or inner fingers. So it's not outside, it's the palm and the inner fingers. So this part of your hand, like what you close right here, if you close your hand, that inside part of your hand, fingers and palm, is what breaks your wudu. If you touched it with the outer part of your hand, or if you had a glove on, whatever, if there's a barrier, it doesn't break your wudu. And there's a hadith, man massa dhakarahu falyatawadda. Whoever touches his private part, let him make wudu. And so that's where that hukum comes from. Wallahu alam. Any questions about the nullifiers of wudu?
So how about, say you go to the gas station and you want to buy something, the woman you meet it. How about the woman touch your hand?
Yeah.
Don't touch the woman's hand.
She touches your hand.
You.
Yeah.
So that makes you wudu.
Some scholars, they make that differentiation. I think even the Shafi'i school, I think in an earlier opinion, they say if the other person touches you, their wudu breaks and not yours. I think there's a narration of that sort. But no, in the Shafi'i school, it doesn't matter who touches who. Touching skin to skin contact happens and the wudu is broken. That's why I said that, the other opinion is that with desire. So if a person wants to adopt that, that's a valid opinion to adopt and practice, is that if it's with desire. But if you just accidentally touch someone, it doesn't break your wudu. Yeah, wallahu alam.
Yeah, but the design is hard for people like to tawaf for all those things. They're very crowded.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I heard the people use shafi'i when to you tawaf and then you make attention to another mashab
Yeah.
to touching.
Yeah, that's what the Shafi'is do. Because in tawaf, it's overcrowded.
Yeah.
And so men and women accidentally touch each other. And you can't do tawaf without wudu. Right, so you need the wudu to do tawaf. So what they say that you can adopt another madhab in that issue. So, wallahu alam, you can adopt the second opinion, that is touching with desire. So accidental, inshallah, don't worry too much about it. Don't worry too much about it. Also, we should note that it's sunnah to renew your wudu for every salah. So this is a sunnah, that you renew your wudu for every salah, even if you have wudu. It's sunnah to renew your wudu for every salah, but only wajib if these four things happen. But sunnah for every prayer, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, any other questions about the nullifiers of wudu? Okay, alhamdulillah. All right, the next ahkam are also really important, which I will inshallah try to speak on, quickly. I want to reach. We have Ramadan is not too far away, so we want to cover as much as we can before Ramadan. So this next masail are very important. What are this section? This section here is on page 22. The author, rahimahullah, he speaks about the forbidden acts for a person in a minor state of impurity, major state of impurity, and in the state of menses. So there's three states of impurity. Minor state of impurity, we call this in Arabic al-hadath al-asghar. In Arabic, it's called al-hadath al-asghar. This is, you're in a state of impurity, but it's small. It's a minor one. And this is when you don't have wudu. You're in a minor state of impurity. You're in hadath asghar. Major state of impurity, hadath akbar, is janaba. When you're in the state of janaba, then, which means you need ghusl, then you're in a major state of impurity. And hayd is menses. And so each one of these things, each one of these states there are certain things that are haram in that state. There are certain things that are haram in that state. And so inshallah we'll read all three, inshallah, one by one. So on page 22, the top of 22, he says, the forbidden actions for a person in the state of minor impurity are four. Right? The minor state of impurity means what? is in need of wudu, minor impurity. What's haram when you don't have wudu? Only 4 things. Salah. Right. I think that's consensus. Nobody says you can make salah without wudu. Right. The scholars agree upon that. Imam Abu Hanifa, I believe, he says if a person makes salah without wudu as a joke, it takes him out of Islam. So it's not something to take lightly, to make salah without wudu, as a joke, of course. Because if you make the salah a joke, it's a form of nullifying Islam. So we have to, of course, this consensus, you don't pray salah without wudu. Number 2 is tawaf. Right? And the hadith says that tawaf is like salah, except that Allah made speech halal in tawaf. Right? There's a hadith of that meaning. So tawaf is like salah. You are in a state of salah. You should have khushu', dhikr, worship, all of that. Read Quran, make dhikr, make dua, all of that while you're making tawaf. Except the only thing that makes tawaf different from salah is that you can talk. You can talk and you can move around. Number 3, and this is the majority of the scholars, they say 3 and 4. Touching the mushaf or carrying the mushaf. Any of the 2. So you have the mushaf right there. If I don't have wudu right now, according to the majority of the scholars, you can't touch it. And if you have the mushaf in a bag, you can't carry the bag. You can't. So that's what they say. Touching or carrying. It's 2 different things. Touching is you just touch it. Carrying is you carry it. So if you have a bag, it's a special bag just for the Quran. If it's mixed, it's fine. If it's mixed, it's fine. But you have a bag only for the Quran. You have, for example, you go to your Quran class, you have a backpack with your Quran only. That one you can't carry it. But if it's mixed, it's okay. No problem. There's no problem. And now this is, we said, the majority of the scholars. But a lot of our contemporary scholars, they say that there isn't any explicit hadith, authentic explicit hadith, to say that touching the mushaf and carrying it without wudu is haram. There is no authentic explicit hadith. It's based on the ayah, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. No one touches the Quran except the pure. But the scholars of tafsir, they debated. They're saying, what is the pure? Is it referring to the malaika? Is it referring to pure from janaba, purity from janaba, or purity from hadath asghar, minor impurity? They said, it's not, it just says, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. No one touches it except those who accept the pure. So a lot of our contemporary scholars, they argue against this. They say, no, touching the mushaf is permissible even without wudu. Right? So that is an opinion that is that's being adopted by a lot of our contemporary scholars. And so, wallahu alam, personally, when it comes to the Quran, I avoid touching it without wudu. Because that is what our scholars said, the 4 madhahib. Interestingly, the 4 madhahib, they have this opinion. So I tell, even when I teach my students, don't touch the mushaf without wudu. It shouldn't be done. You have to have respect and honor for the Quran. And this is for me, it's an issue of etiquette as well. Honoring the Quran, right, and venerating the Quran was something our scholars and our elders, learned as children. They would never put the Quran on the ground. If it touches the ground, they would immediately pick it up and kiss it. It was always put somewhere high. It was never, mixed and with clustered things and so on and so forth. One of the ibtila'at that we have today is, subhanAllah, that respect for the deen is disappearing, right? And so part of that is teaching them that what? Don't touch the Quran without wudu. You have to be clean. You have to be in a state of purity. And so I teach that because of the importance of teaching adab with the Quran and teaching respect for the Quran. Although that other opinion permits it and they have a strong argument for it, but out of adab and respect for the Quran, I tell them no. And so that's wallahu alam. That's kind of my practice. And even for myself, I adhere to the same thing, unless unless there's a circumstance or something of that nature. But generally, adhere to wudu. And if a person cannot, for whatever reason, or they're in this position they cannot, then they can still read the touch of the mushaf. It's not reading the Quran, it's just touching the mushaf and carrying it. Somebody might ask, how about the phone? Can we open the Quran app without wudu? This is a contemporary issue, but wallahu alam, the hukum is that yes, it's permissible. So touching the phone without wudu is permissible. Can you hand me that mushaf right there, the translation one? Yeah, can you bring me this? Thank you. Jazakallah khair. So this mushaf here as well, you can touch. You can touch. So this is what I tell people. If you don't have wudu, use your app, use the translation. And I like this because this version, when I give people a recommendation for a translated Mus'haf Quran, I give them this. Why? It maintains the normal format of the Quran. You know, our mind, we memorize images. So we just don't memorize Quran. You memorize the page. You memorize if it's left side, right side, where it begins. So some of the apps they have, it's random, and the way they organize the ayat is very different. I don't really like those apps, and I don't like Musahaf, the translation Musahafs that just kind of align the ayat on the sides. So I like translations like this where they keep the regular format of the Musahaf, so that when you're reading, you still have the image of the regular Musahaf, and then the translation is there. And the scholars, they say, you can touch any book that carries the Quran as long as the translation is more than 50%. 51% of the book, if it's non-Quran, you can carry it, because it's considered tafsir. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to send letters to the kings with ayat of Quran. Right? He sent letter to the leader of Rome and Persia and right, Abyssinia, and he would have ayat of Quran. So this shows the mushrikeen, they were touching the ayat. But they were just other words. And so the scholars, they say any book that has Quran written on it, but the majority of it, 51% or more, is non-Quran, you can touch. It's fine. You don't need wudu. You can even be janaba. So you can touch this in a state of without wudu, in a state of no janaba. A woman on her menses can touch this as well. So anybody can touch this. There's no requirement. A non-Muslim can touch this. There's no requirement of purity to touch a translation of the Quran. Only the mushaf that is Quran, only Quran, that one requires wudu, and somebody in janaba and menses cannot touch it, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So that's an important mas'ala. And we're going to get to the issue of menses. But right now, inshallah, I'm just going to suffice with that because we need to speak about menses and especially the education of women and girls, and making sure that menses is not a barrier from that. Okay, so we talked we talked about the things that are haram when you are in hadath asghar. We call it hadath asghar. All right, minor impurity. Now the next one is hadath akbar, major impurity. All the four things we mentioned above are included. So you can't pray salah if you're in janaba. You can't make tawaf if you're in janaba. You can't, janaba is when you have a wet dream or intercourse. We call that janaba. So that's called hadath akbar. And so you can't make salah, you can't make tawaf, you can't touch the Quran, you can't carry it as well. This is for sure. In wudu it's debated, but in janaba it's pretty much mostly agreed upon that you can't. And the opinions that say you can are very weak and very minor adopted. So, but with janaba, it is haram. You can't touch the mushaf. If a person is in a major state of impurity, they cannot touch the mushaf. If you have the mushaf next to your bed, you can't touch it. Be very careful when you are in the state of janaba. You don't touch the mushaf. One of the etiquettes, actually, the scholars, they say, a person shouldn't have their mushaf openly laid in their bedroom. If they're married and they have marital relationships in their bedroom, they shouldn't have books of knowledge and the Quran sitting openly in their bedroom. And they say it's a matter of etiquette and adab. They shouldn't be nude in the presence of the mushaf. That they should conceal it or make sure they are covered. And so that is some of the matter of adab and etiquette that some of our scholars mentioned. So that just came to mind right now. But yeah, you can't touch it though. You can't touch it. You can't carry it. When in the state of janaba. There are two additional things for the person in the state of janaba. They can't recite it as well. So you can't recite Quran in the state of janaba, except for the purpose of dua. So if you're reciting Ayatul Kursi, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Qul A'udhu bil Falaq, Qul A'udhu bi Rabbin Nas before bed, or you're reciting the Afkar of the morning and evening, you can recite ayat. But you can't recite it for the purpose of tilawah. You're reciting it for the purpose of dua. Dua for that time. So if a person is in a state of janaba and they're going to sleep, they can read Quran. Those surahs that you read before bed. If they're in a state of janaba in the morning, they want to make the azkar of sabah, they can make janaba. They can recite Quran. And so on and so forth. So you can do it with the intent of dua, but you can't do it with the intent of tilawah. With the intent of tilawah. And then number 6 is to remain in the masjid. You cannot remain in the masjid while in a state of janaba. So if a person is making i'tikaf, they're in the masjid, and they have a wet dream, they have to go take a shower immediately. That's why a lot of the masajid, they try to provide showers. So that during i'tikaf, if a person has a wet dream, they don't have to leave the masjid. That they can just make their shower in the masjid and continue their i'tikaf. But if there is no shower available in the masjid and they're unable to make a shower in the masjid, interestingly, you don't even need a bucket. You don't need a shower, right? Traditionally, people just use buckets, right? So you can always do that to get out of your janaba. Right, folks from back home, that's very common, right? The youth, they haven't had that experience, right? They're just used to running water, hot showers, hot water, and so on. And so, alhamdulillah for what Allah has granted us. And so, you can't remain in the masjid. You can't remain in the masjid in the state of janab. So either get out and go home and take a shower, and if there's a shower available in the masjid, you take a shower in the masjid. And then we said again, do not mix. I warned this is a very important masala. People often mix mani, which is like semen. They mix it with wadi and madi, which is like the pre-sexual fluid and the discharge after urine. So those two things are not janaba. They just require wudu. Only mani, right, semen, that's the one that requires wudu. That requires ghusl, that puts you in janaba. All right, and then the last thing is regarding menses, and this is important. So the 6 things we mentioned above are included. All right, so a woman on her menses cannot make salah, she can't make tawaf, she can't touch the Quran or carry the mushaf. She can't touch the mushaf or carry it, right? And then remaining in the masjid and reciting the Quran. The scholars, they said for these 2 mas'ala, they did something called qiyas. Qiyas is called analogy. When you find 2 things that resemble each other, you give it the same ruling, although there's no clear text. This is called qiyas in usul al-fiqh. For example, Allah made khamr haram, right? Why is khamr haram, the scholars they say? They say khamr is haram because it intoxicates the mind. Then they say, anything that intoxicates the mind is also haram. So, drugs, right? Marijuana, cocaine, whatever, right? Meth, any drug that a person uses that intoxicates the mind, that makes the mind unstable and just, abnormal, then they say that has the same ruling of khamr. Somebody says, Ya Shaykh, where's the ayah? Where's the hadith? They tell them the dalil is qiyas. The dalil is what? Qiyas. It's one of the 4 foundation evidences that the scholars of usul agree upon. There are 4 evidence. There are up to 12. 8 the scholars debate. Is the opinion of a Sahaba evidence? For example, Abdullah bin Umar, he has an opinion. Do we have to follow that, or can we make our own judgment? Is the laws of the nations before us evidence? There's a lot of things. Is the action of Ahl al-Madinah evidence? Right? There are a lot of laws, evidences that the scholars debate. But there are 4 they agree upon. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', which is consensus. When the whole ummah agrees on something, it's ijma'. You can't break that. And today, non-Muslims, not non-Muslims, but modern movements are working very hard to kind of take this apart. They're trying to take the Sunnah out of Islam, and they're trying to take Ijma', consensus, out of Islam. They're trying to make way to reinterpret Islam. Does that make sense? They're trying to make way to reinterpret Islam. So they're trying to take out the Sunnah. They're trying to discredit Abu Hurairah. They're trying to discredit Imam Bukhari. They're trying to discredit the authentic books of Hadith. And they're trying to discredit Ijma', consensus. One of those examples, for example, is homosexuality. It's consensus. The whole ummah agreed for 1400 years that this is haram. But now, how can they change? How can they create a new interpretation? They have to say they want to take out ijma'. There are other issues of hijab or or halal and haram or other things, how can you take that out the deen? You take out hadith. If you can take out hadith, you take out a lot of the deen. Right? So there's a lot of modern movements trying to reinterpret Islam. And so our scholars of usul, they made this system called usul al-fiqh that teaches us how we deduce Islamic law. And so one of those things is analogy. All the madhahib agree on analogy. There are 4 evidences. We said Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' and Qiyas. We should know these 4 evidences that Ahl Sunnah all agree upon. And so Qiyas, right? Why is this important for us to know? In this mas'ala of menses, for the women in their menstruation, the scholars, the Shafi'i school and others, have said that we do analogy, we do qiyas. The women on her menses is similar to a person in janaba. Does that make sense? And so therefore they say whatever is haram for a person in janaba is also haram for a person in menses. They made that argument. Other scholars have argued against this. They said, no, that analogy is flawed. They say, why? The difference is, they say, the person in janaba can remove their janaba at any moment. The woman on her menses, she cannot remove her menses at any moment. So to compare the two is flawed. You can't make that analogy. They argued against it, right? So if we adopt that argument, which I personally do, in this opinion, that reciting the Quran and remaining in the masjid is not haram for a woman on menses. Reciting the Quran and remaining in the masjid is not haram for a woman on her menses. That is the opinion that I personally adopt. And it's a minority opinion, it's not the majority, but there's strong evidence for it. Another reason is that if we were to prevent the women from entering the masajid and reciting the Quran, that means they lose 1/4 of the time of their education. And that is problematic, right? At least that is problematic. And so we cannot deprive our women and our daughters and our sisters, our wives, our mothers from learning the deen. Every month they have to miss a quarter of the month. They can't attend the classes in the masajid, and they can recite their Quran and continue their hifz. And if she's a teacher, every 3 weeks you have to have a substitute hired, and it's very problematic, right? It's very problematic. And so for these reasons, and others our scholars have mentioned, but these are some arguments or reasons to say that women on their menses can recite the Quran, and especially when there's no authentic direct hadith. There's no explicit authentic hadith to say it's haram. So for that reason, it is permissible. Sometimes a lot of parents, they don't bring their daughters to the madrasa during their masjid. I tell them, no, bring them. Do not stop their education for that. Bring them to the masjid. Bring them to class. Let them continue their learning. The only thing I would say is that the touching the mushaf, they shouldn't touch the mushaf. Let them read the translation. Give them the translation or give them their phones. But do not stop their education. And so that is kind of the middle ground, wallahu alam, and a practical solution regarding these masail. And so inshallah share this with others so that they know and so that our sisters' education is not interrupted. The 7th is fasting. And so fasting is not obligatory during menses. It's actually haram. Number 8 is divorce. It is haram to divorce a woman during her menses. Oftentimes divorce happens during times of anger. Islam teaches us divorce shouldn't be during a time of anger. It should be a decision made at a time of calmness and sound judgment. A person can make a divorce. It could be a valid reason. Maybe these couple are not getting along, or there's ongoing issues, or there's some certain matters that they just can't resolve. It's permissible, but to do it during the time of anger is not allowed. And to do it during the time of menses is not allowed. So a person has to make sure that they don't use divorce and they don't do divorce during a woman's menses. During a woman's menses, they can't divorce during that time. Number 9 is to pass through the masjid for a woman who thinks her blood might soil the masjid. And so this is a classical issue. Today, alhamdulillah, there's all types of hygienic, pads and things available. But in the case that a woman doesn't have something and she fears that she might soil the masjid with najasa, then it is haram for her to enter or pass through the masjid. And number 10 is to take sexual pleasure from what is between the navel and the knees. And this is strongly debated. There are various ahadith. On a woman on her menses, Allah says that it's prohibited. That, isn't the Surah Al-Baqarah, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ. Allah says, avoid the women during their menses. And so there are different ahadith have given different rules. Some ahadith have said that a man and a woman can have all types of relationships during menses except intercourse. Other hadiths have said that a man and woman there cannot be contact between the navel and the knees during the menses. So the Shafi'i school, they took that second hadith. They said everything between the navel and the knees is haram. That there shouldn't be any contact there during the menses so that it doesn't lead to anything haram, and also because there are hadith there. The other opinion is that is authentic hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said you can do everything during menses except intercourse. And so that opinion, they said even the navel and the knees is permissible. The Shafi'i school, they stuck with the second opinion, and so we'll suffice with that. Wallahu a'lam. And if a person took the other opinion, it is permissible. Wallahu a'lam. And so that concludes the masail of wudu and that which is haram during the state of minor impurity, major impurity, and during the state of menstruation. Any questions about these masail? All right, good. All right, so the next thing we're going to enter into the section of tayammum. And then tayammum, inshallah, should be fairly fast. We'll save that for tomorrow night, inshallah. We'll conclude tayammum tomorrow night on Saturday. And then Sunday, inshallah, we'll get into najasa and how to clean najasa. And also, there will be a brief section on menses. And we will conclude the section on tahara by Sunday night, inshallah ta'ala. We'll be done with the section of tahara. Monday night, we will start the section on salah. Inshallah, if we go according to schedule and there's no interruptions and I'm not absent. Inshallah, and I don't plan to be. I should be here for the next 3 nights. Inshallah, we'll conclude the 2 sections and then we'll start Monday night the ahkam of salah. And then inshallah, let's see. I mean, I really hope we can finish salah and maybe even start Sawm in before Ramadan, inshallah. Bi-idhnillah ta'ala.